Hello, everyone. Before we begin, I would like to provide a trigger warning. Today's session includes discussions about violence and harassment in the workplace and violence against women. My name is Jeanette Southwood. My pronouns are she, her, elle. I'm an engineer. I'm an able-bodied woman. I am Black. I was the first person in my immediate family to attend university. I'm Engineers Canada's Vice President, Corporate Affairs and Strategic Partnerships. Welcome to the final virtual session of the 2023 30 by 30 conference organized by Engineers Canada. Engineers Canada was founded to uphold the honor, integrity, and interests of the engineering profession. We work on behalf of the 12 provincial and territorial associations that regulate engineering practice and license the country's more than 300,000 members of the engineering profession. And our vision is to advance Canadian engineering through national collaboration. Conversation today will be held on Discord. The channel is participant-led, and we will not be providing translation services for the Discord chat, but participants are welcome to participate in any language. I know that we have people joining us from across the country, and in fact, also outside of the country, and we would like to encourage you to get into Discord. Throughout the session, we also encourage you to share your thoughts, ask questions, and actively engage in this topic. So, as you are getting into Discord and letting us know where you're joining us from, I'll go through a few housekeeping items. First, today's speakers and panelists will be speaking in English. However, there is simultaneous translation, interpretation available in French. The instructions for how to access the interpretation are currently shown on the screen. Closed captioning in English is also available today and can be accessed using the closed captioning button in your Zoom menu at the bottom of the screen. We ask that you mute the microphone and turn off your camera to avoid any interruptions during the presentation. We remind everyone to approach this session with empathy, understanding, respect, and kindness for both yourselves and your community. As part of our commitment to incorporating Indigenous ways of being and ways of knowing into the engineering profession, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. I myself am participating in this virtual session as a visitor on the traditional and unceded territory of the Omami, Wininiwag, Anishinaabe people, coming as an immigrant from Cape Town, South Africa. I come with respect for this land that I am on today and for the people who have resided and do reside here. While we meet on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the effect of residential schools, also known as assimilation institutions, and colonialism on Indigenous families and communities, and to consider how we are and can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Today, we gather for the last virtual session of the 30 by 30 conference. Engineers are duty-bound to uphold the values of truth, honesty, and trustworthiness, and safeguard human life. They hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Our ethical obligations as engineers mean we all have a role to play in preventing violence. Today's speakers will be discussing workplace violence prevention, how to go beyond the legal framework to be an anti-violence and anti-harassment workplace. Please welcome our speakers today, Kim Bouffard and Paulette Senior. Kim Bouffard is the Manager of Belonging and Engagement at Engineers Canada. She is responsible for building and maintaining strategic relationships and initiatives that increase the relevance and sustainability of the profession. She leads work on increasing the number of women in engineering, work across truth and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, engineering career awareness amongst children and youth, national education programs and campaigns such as National Engineering Month. And Kim manages our relationships with student federations such as the Canadian Federation of Engineering Students and national associations to move forward inclusion issues related to the profession. Paulette Senior is president and CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation. She has devoted her career to empowering women and girls to overcome barriers and reach their full potential. Paulette started her career on the front lines of social service organizations in some of Toronto's most underserved neighborhoods. Throughout her career, she has earned numerous awards and become one of the most respected women leaders and speakers in Canada. Paulette is a member of the G7 Gender Equality Advisory Council, an advisory body that develops recommendations on gender equality issues across the G7 agenda. In 2021, she received an honorary doctorate of laws from the University of Lethbridge. She is featured in the book, Inspiring Canadians, 40 Brilliant Canadians and Their Vision for the Nation. And most recently, her organization received the Governor General's Innovation Award for their signal for help to help abuse survivors in the pandemic spike of gendered violence. The hand gesture innovation is used in over 45 countries, and it has saved many lives. Earlier this year, I participated as a member of Canada's official delegation to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, and was fortunate to see Paulette and her colleagues present on the Signal for Help. Over to you, Kim.
Thank you, Jeanette, for those introductions. As Jeanette mentioned, it is a real pleasure to have Paulette join us today as we explore anti-violence in the workplace. When we were starting to organize this conference in these virtual sessions, we reached out to our network of allies and asked them, what do you need and what is it that you want to know more about in order to help move forward our work in 30 by 30? And an overwhelming number of our 30 by 30 champions asked us to seek out expertise, experts who could talk about anti-violence in the workplace. They shared that they kept hearing stories about harassment and violence, where the individuals had gone through what they saw as the only channels that were available to them, and yet felt like nothing was really happening. So it is our hope that after this session, we'll come away with a better understanding of the issues and what we can do to help ourselves and our peers in these situations when they arise. But before we get too deep into the issues, the first question that I would like to ask Paulette today is if you could just give us a little brief overview about your organization, the Canadian Women's Foundation, and how this work connects to preventing gender-based violence.
Thank you so much, Kim. And also, I want to add my thanks to Jeanette for that wonderful introduction. I kind of got inspired when she talked about the awards that we're receiving, and we're going to be receiving the newest one next month, the Governor General's Award for our Signal for Help. So that's still really very exciting for us. And I also want to just say hello to everyone. Thank you so much to Engineers Canada for inviting me to be part of this conference. It's always great to speak with new folks that we haven't been able to reach out to before. And we love opportunities like this to spread the word about not just the foundation, but about the issues that we work to advance in Canada. And I also want to add my acknowledgement for the Indigenous lands that we live, work, and play on in Canada. And of course, I'm here, our office is on the traditional territory of Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, and William Street is signatories of the Mississauga and Chippewa Nations. So just want to make sure that we do that and to acknowledge that while the acknowledgements are important to do, that the work we do is really what matters. So in terms of a bit more about the foundation, we know that our pursuit for gender justice is tightly intertwined with pursuing truth, pursuing reconciliation, pursuing decolonization. And so it is within that vein that we work to actually create allyship in terms of our strategic priorities. And for those who don't know about the Canadian Women's Foundation, we were founded in 1991, so just over 30 years ago, by a group of incredible visionary women who recognized that there was no national organization in Canada that was dedicated to advancing gender equality. So what they did was they identified and did some research to show that only about 2% of charitable donations, so charitable dollars from corporations and foundations, were actually going directly to services for women and girls. And so in light of that, they created the foundation. And it was really about funding work around advocacy that focused on 4 critical areas. And so these areas include ending gender-based violence, ending women's poverty, building girls' empowerment, and building inclusive leadership. And since our inception, our generous donors, I'm happy to say, and those who support the work that we do, have contributed just over $185 million, supporting thousands of life-transforming programs throughout the country. And in our last fiscal year, more than 1 million lives were actually impacted. So this means a great deal in terms of the work that we do.
Wow, that's fantastic. So yeah, definitely looking forward to learning more from you today about what we can do collectively as a profession. One of the questions I have is around some of the myths that we hear around gender-based violence in Canada, and how are they carrying over into the workplace?
Well, it's always a good day when you get to kind of bust a myth, if you will, because lots of myths exist around the existence, the presence, the prevalence of gender-based violence in Canada, and how they actually carry over in workplaces, but also in all aspects of our lives. And so when we talk about gender-based violence, there's often a myth that we're only talking about physical violence that leaves visible injuries that you can see on people's bodies or bruises. And that, I think, is dangerous, because what it does, it perpetuates a cycle of violence, because it can be used to excuse or downplay abusive behavior that doesn't leave physical marks, but is still just as harmful. And this also makes it more difficult for survivors to identify what they're experiencing as abuse, and because there can be confusion that's created because what is seen as abuse is not accepted in the general society that it is, and so it prevents them from reaching out for help. And I think that's why it's critical, Kim, that for everyone to understand that gender-based violence includes emotional abuse and coercion, sexual assault and harassment, cyber violence, so the control of someone's presence, or as well as intimidating someone online. And there's other behaviors that may leave no visible trace, but can still cause what we call debilitating trauma. And another myth that's associated is that women are blamed, and society usually blames women for the violence and abuse that they experience, that it's about their behavior, it's about what they wore, it's about the relationships that they choose to be in. And yet we have a culture of victim blaming, which also discourages women and gender diverse people from reporting abuse. And so we often quote stats around what is the prevalence of gender-based violence, but also keep in mind as you hear those stats that those are reported cases, and most cases, in fact, are not reported. GBV, as we call it, is rooted in long-standing patriarchal and sexist cultural messages, and these root causes carry over into the workplaces that we occupy every day, and the relationships that may develop from that, collegial relationships. Inequality is baked into all of Canada's economic, political, and public streams, and these systems were imported and imposed by those who kind of led Canada during colonial times. So primarily white, English-speaking, land-owning men from the educated upper classes. And so, not surprisingly, they created a system that includes laws and policies and specifically designed to advance their interests, and maintain their power. So it's no wonder that, those of us who have kind of, been raised in this kind of colonial structure don't even recognize it, that these systems are actually designed, I should say, and actually is responsible for the imbalance at the leadership and decision-making levels that we have. Why you would have Engineers Canada would have an initiative such as 30 by 30. It comes from that kind of design that created that imbalance that we're experiencing. And this imbalance influences everything from strategic priorities to budget decisions to workplace culture. And in workplaces, employees may experience gender-based violence from colleagues or supervisors or even employers, and may involve an escalating pattern of behavior and often involves the abuse of authority. And we also know that many sort of high-profile cases involving abuse of authority made headlines. If you recall, just a few years ago, we were talking about, and the media was occupied with the Me Too movement, right? But more casual forms of sexual harassment are also quite prevalent and are sometimes part of the culture in workplaces where employees may experience unwanted touching, for example, or inappropriate comments on their parents or, their bodies, obscene language or jokes or emails, or being cornered by someone who repeatedly asks them out, even though they've said yes or said no so many times. So, it's the kind of behaviors that can seem innocuous, but repetitive. And so those are some of the things that you have to kind of look out for. And sometimes people become shut down and silenced by that, and may sort of quietly leave. And you will never know why they've left, because there's so much shame that's associated with experiencing the behaviors, not perpetrating the behaviors. So things are lopsided in that way and imbalanced in that way because we've been sort of socialized to feel as if it's our fault and that we're the ones that's inviting it, when it's been uninvited. And it's also there's been many times that women have said no. So those are just some of the kind of myth busting information that's important to keep in mind. And it's hard to fight that, Kim, because we've all been raised with it to think that's it. And so it becomes this sort of automatic response as opposed to an informed response.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you mentioned that, what we're hearing a lot about is like the culture, right? So, you're in this organization. We know that many of these organizations are predominantly made up of men. And so you have women that are looking and you want to be part of the team. You want to feel like you fit in. You got to fit into this culture that exists. And sometimes there's those jokes. And like you said, they start to build up and they start to build up. And then, it's not a joke anymore. Things start to progress and press. And sometimes it gets kind of gray about like, okay, well, where did we draw the line? When should I have drawn that line? And again, It all feels like it's on you. You're like, oh, maybe I should have said something earlier. I should have, but it's like.
And you know what, Kim, sometimes we may even participate in the jokes, just trying to feel like we fit in and to feel as if we belong. And then we feel shame about that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about culture change, this is like a black box, there's it's so complicated. But what we really need to do is we need to see a culture change around this in order if we want to stop this gender-based violence and harassment and other things that we see are ongoing within the workplace. How can everyday people be part of this change? Like, what can we do?
I love that question because I think, I think we need to talk about, people need to understand what the impact is. And so, but we also need to understand what is the culture that we're living in that actually leads to the kind of behaviors that become normalized, right? And so the foundation is working on initiatives to shift the culture, shift it around gender-based violence from one of the experience of stigma and silence that I talked about earlier to one that is about safety and support. And so in Canada, we know that 2/3, based on stats that we've done, 2/3 of us, all of us, know a woman who has experienced abuse, but only 1 in 5 of us are confident or very confident we know how to actually support them when they share that with us. So there is significant knowledge gap that we see there, and probably continues to perpetuate the violence as well as the presence of gender-based violence. There are also attitudinal barriers and stigmas that are around the subject matter of abuse. So our research found that almost a quarter of people say partner abuse is one of the issues that they would say it's none of my business. I'm not going to mess in other people's business. That's their problem, and it doesn't directly involve me. And I think we can all kind of relate to that, And so it's critical that we close this knowledge gap as well as the response gap, I would say, because abuse survivors do often turn to friends, to family, to coworkers, people that they trust, that they have relationships with. And gender-based violence thrives in climates of shame and silence, right? So when it's ignored, when no one talks about it, when the victims are ashamed, that's when it thrives. And so we must work on ways to change the culture and have these conversations in our everyday lives. And that's why I'm so inspired that Engineers Canada is actually delving into something that is not an easy subject matter, right? But it's so important that we normalize the conversation so those who are experiencing it can actually voice it. And we need to learn how to listen and how to help connect people to services in a supportive, non-judgmental way. And this is why we launched what we call our Signal for Help Responder initiative. Hopefully many folks who are listening in or on this in this event have heard of our Signal for Help, which has gone viral globally. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we were concerned about how the lockdowns that we're all told to stay inside and not go out in terms of our own sort of health safety concerns, that these restrictions made it even more difficult for women in those kind of difficult situations that were abusive to reach out for support. So since they're often being monitored by their abusers, especially if everyone's locked down, it became difficult for them to secretly, because it's important that it's in secret, to secretly let someone know they need help. And maybe I'll just take a pause here to say why it's in secret, because you may not understand that. It's in secret because we know from stats that when a woman declares to her abusive partner that she's leaving, that's when her life becomes the most at risk. That's when femicide occurs. Femicide being the killing of being killed by your intimate partner, right? So the killing of a woman by their intimate partners. And so that's why it needs to be silent and in secret, finding a way to actually share that you are experiencing abuse without letting your abuser know is the safest way. So we started promoting the Signal for Help. It is a way for someone to silently indicate in a video call such as this, or in other kind of situations that may be appropriate, that they want someone to check in with them without leaving a digital trace. And a digital trace is also an important aspect here. You don't want to leave a digital trace in terms of an email or a text or anything that can be that would be backed up by your systems and can be found. So since we launched a Signal for Help, as I said, it went viral. It has been adopted by organizations around the world and has made headlines in cases where women and girls have used it to get out of situations of immediate danger. And there have been stories, particularly in the US media, but also on social media, that these circumstances were quite dire. And it seems to me that women's lives were saved because of the use of the Signal. But whether or not someone uses a Signal or our Signal, we need more people to know how to respond or provide support if they suspect that someone is experiencing abuse. And this is why we launched a Signal for Help responder guide, which is a campaign which provides learning resources for offering, as I said, non-judgmental support. I would implore people to go to our Signal for Help Responder.ca site, where you can sign up for free online mini courses that can take that won't take much time at all, but it's about taking the time to learn to get the support for someone that may in your life that may have told you they're experiencing this, or that you may suspect that they're experiencing abuse as well. So that's one of the things I think is important in terms of addressing culture. That's why we created it. It's really about being able to, find a way within our somewhat impenetrable cultures that we have in our workplaces or society at large to kind of get the critical information and tools and resources to folks to change the mindset, right? To start conversations, to initiate dialogue around this issue. And the Signal for Help has been extraordinary in creating that kind of momentum.
That's great. It's good to know that we have that resource available to us, and we'll make sure that everyone who's joined us today has a link to it. I like how you kind of really brought forward that it's like, sometimes we like to try and compartmentalize our lives, right? But the things that are going on home are coming into our work and vice versa. And so the more that we can talk about these things and the more aware of the different tools and things that are available to us, the better we'll be able to support one another when these things arise. So I really appreciate you going through that.
And you know what, as employers, we are responsible for maintaining a workplace of safety for our staff. And so it's important that we are constantly working on that culture to bring that out as much as possible and to find ways to respond in a way that's appropriate.
Mm-hmm. So sort of building on that, so speaking about culture, we know that progress on gender-based violence in the workplace varies depending where you work. You know, it's a little bit all over the place. Some organizations and industries are further along than others. And I'm wondering if you could speak to why you think that might be.
Sure. And thanks for that question, because generally we're seeing that more progress in the corporate world toward, like, we're having this conversation today, which is not a normal conversation to be having in corporate Canada. But we're getting more requests like this to actually at least kickstart the conversation through presentations toward advancing gender equity as well as diversity and inclusion initiatives. So broadly, that is happening much more than the norm. And staff members are also becoming more engaged in advancing these efforts. And as you said at the beginning of this event, and looking to employers for accountability around issues like sexual harassment, for example. There's also a higher level of awareness around creating the business case for advancing diversity and inclusion. We know that, we've heard it. There's plenty of evidence that it contributes to, better performance and better bottom lines in terms of our financial goals. And given that, there's a persistent gender imbalance and skill shortages in engineering, it probably even is much more of a priority for Engineers Canada. But each workplace is starting from a different point and will have its own unique challenges. I know we do, even though we're the nonprofit charitable sector, we have our challenges as well. It is a business. And so it's critical to make sure that there are policies and practices, training and expectations around workplace culture that mean everyone can feel safer from gender-based violence and harassment. And creating this kind of culture may mean getting outside consultation and training issues to address harassment and unconscious bias, diversity and inclusion, to talk about why they're important. And as we've discussed, there are often internal blind spots that hinder progress, and outside expertise can help to accelerate that change. You may not need outside expertise for the entire process. And in fact, I would encourage organizations to do a lot of learning around that to seize opportunities to do that. But, having that outside expertise to poke away, question, create that sort of critical analysis of what's happening is very helpful. And then to also be ensuring that managers and leaders can have sort of effective channels of communication with their employees, with the folks that they manage, as well as to talk about issues that may be on people's minds. So, for example, our philanthropy team would invite folks from our various corporate partners across the country to have some of these critical chats to reflect on what they're seeing as needs for change within their own environment. And it's amazing some of the things that we are able to learn from these chats, where folks feel very comfortable through a facilitated conversation to say, you know what, this is happening and I don't know how to deal with it, or I wish that my employer would actually create, from the top, kind of set the tone from the top of the organization that this behavior is not acceptable. So those are some of the things that we're hearing. So you're creating you're kind of tilling the ground to create that safety for people to say, this is happening. And I think above all, sort of changing culture and advancing progress on safe and inclusive workplaces requires adequate resourcing. Money does matter in some of these initiatives that we take on. So we need to resource it and we need to plan, just as how we create business plans every year and sort of assess them every quarter. We actually encourage our corporate partners to do the same when it comes to these less tangible, but potentially very damaging issues if they're not managed well. And it needs to be an organizational strategic planning commitment rather than something that gets dealt as damage control or at the side of someone's desk where they're not necessarily being paid to do it. So those are just some of the comments I would have to that.
It's great. I know that often when you initially hear some of these things, and like you said, normally when we think about, gender-based violence in the workplace, we're thinking about something very physical, but it's like you mentioned earlier on, it's much more than that. And so when we think of that, though, I know people's minds tend to go like, oh, this is an HR issue. And so, or I have to bring this up to my immediate supervisor. There's these different changes, but what you're saying is that isn't enough. So there's no big surprise that we're hearing from our members that they're coming to us and saying, listen, we went through these channels. I went to the HR, I went to this, and I just don't feel like it's been resolved. And so if we want to have people feel like, I feel like I was heard, I feel like this has been addressed, I feel like I belong, but this needs to be a bigger, more strategic effort happening within the organization, like you said, from the top down, but also from the bottom up. And I'm thinking like what you're talking about goes beyond training, right? I mean, I wonder if you could just dig into that a little bit more. Like, so you're talking about how creating like committees or groups and making it normalized to have these conversations. I'm just wondering if you can paint a picture for us, but like, how would we kind of go about that? Like, what would be, step one, step two?
That's such a good question. We are in a time where ESGs are important for particularly the corporate sector, but I think every business in this country. And so whether we're talking about the environment, social issues, or governance, all of that is important. And it's also something that I think auditors are starting to look at, what is your ESG programs? And so to me, it's within a framework of doing good business that I think we need to be addressing, in this case, these social issues. So the S in the ESG. And I think, just generating conversations, hearing from people, doing a survey, for example, we did a wellness survey back in the end of last year, and we learned some good things and some not so good things that have then sort of spurred us to put in place increased benefits to support folks' mental health, to have conversations, difficult ones, about what folks that they're experiencing. Because when you're working in a hybrid model or virtually, it's even less visible. You know, these things can hide even more. And so, you know, we need to be putting in constant efforts to hear from people, and being prepared to hear the news, to hear the good news and the not so good news. So we found that helped. I know other entities have done the same, just to do a survey, get some sort of expert advice on this, designing the survey, and hear from folks. What are their interests? What inspires them? What are their concerns? What are their ideas? What are they experiencing? You know, because one of the things we say at the foundation, Kim, is that the best solutions come from those who are experiencing it, right? Whatever the it is. And so it's important that we don't think we have all the answers. That is a traditional way of leadership that is bankrupt in times like these, right? And so, you know, and I've learned that the easy and hard way, that I am not expected to have all the answers, but I'm expected to have a keen listening ear. I'm expected to do my own learning, self-learning, as well as learning of what's happening in society. What are the shifts, culture and social shifts I need to understand? And in a time when we're living in times when you know, good employees are hard to keep, it behooves us to actually do everything we can to create the kinds of environments where folks are feeling healthy and safe and happy to the best of our abilities, and to support an environment that is listening, is respectful, is understanding, but also responds in not a one-off way, but a strategic way, with the level of commitment that I think is important. So before I mentioned resourcing, but also planning and involving those folks who have said something about what they're experiencing, to also sort of be a part of the helping to develop the solutions, like widen the tables that we're sitting at, the decision-making tables, and invite other folks to be a part of the conversation.
You mentioned a little earlier in the conversation about the Me Too movement and how it's helped to break the silence and start new conversations around workplace sexual harassment. We know that your organization was involved in the development of a new resource that launched, I think it was just this year. And I think it's called After Me Too. So it's like aftermetoo.com is probably where you could go. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and what it involves?
I'm happy to. So at the height of the Me Too movement that we saw, you know, kind of sweeping the world, that started in the US, but even before that, because the Me Too movement was started by Tarana Burke, an African-American woman in the US, which then was lifted by other voices, particularly of folks in the arts industry, movie, television industry. So at the height of it, you know, we got a call from someone that was in the industry who had her own Me Too movement or Me Too experience years prior. And that's the thing too, because a lot of these, the groundswell that we saw that led to the Me Too movement, a lot of those experiences happened years and decades earlier, right? So this is not a new phenomenon. What's new is that women's voices were no longer silent, right? And that's what the difference is. But so at the height of the voices being raised around it, we got a call, and we were asked by a group of women who sat around a kitchen table and said, look, you know, this is something we want to do something about, and we've created this entity, and we have an idea around what to do that doesn't necessarily involve going to the police, doesn't necessarily involve going to your employer. It doesn't necessarily involve you coming out to the media, because we know that those who get the most attention are those who probably have the highest visibility, because don't forget, we exist in sort of a structural society where the voices that are most silent are those who experience the most oppression. So it could be Indigenous, racialized, women with disability, folks who have, so much pressures on them that to even say something, they would probably not be believed, right? So we decided to support this initiative called After Me Too. And the idea that they came to us with was an idea to develop a site, aftermetoo.com, that you mentioned, that would be sort of an online, I'm going to use the word clearinghouse, for everything concerning workplace harassment, everything, right? That no matter where you live in Canada, it would tell you about your options, your legal options. It would tell you about what are the resources in your community. So if it's sexual assault, it would connect you to that. If it's gender-based violence services, it would connect you to that. It would tell you where they're located in your community. So if you live in Iqaluit, Nunavut, or if you live in Yellowknife, right, it would be that clearinghouse that would direct you to those services, and you would be empowered with the choice and option to select what works best for you, right? Which may or may not involve you kind of utilizing formal structures, but but you are sort of armed with the information and you have access to those resources.
That's fantastic. So you literally go on there, and depending on what, your situation is.
Yes.
So if maybe let's have let's give you like a workplace example, so I'm in the workplace. So I'm in the workplace, and, like this is, for instance, something we've heard, and someone felt like they were, repeatedly getting I think you actually brought this example. So, there's like the cat calls and repeatedly being asked out, and, and constantly being like, no, I'm not interested, and I'm interested in, but then they brought it up to their boss, they brought it to HR, and, it's still going on. And so they're kind of at a loss. So if they were to go to this website, what kind of things would they might find that might help them out in this situation?
Well, the first thing that you'll probably see, because when I myself go on the website just to kind of check on the resources, I was blown away by the accessibility. I was blown away by how welcoming it is. And it will immediately assure you that what's happening to you is not your fault. That's the immediate thing. It will immediately let you know it's not your fault, and you're not alone, and you have options and choices. And so if after you kind of look through the information, and it will kind of say to you, okay, so these are the things you can take to your employer or to HR, if that's the route, or to your manager. So it will help give you kind of a step-by-step guide as to the approach you can take. If you feel that you've exhausted that, or you don't feel safe to do that, it could sort of connect you to a lawyer within your region that you can talk to get further advice. And it could also sort of direct you to other kinds of report mechanisms that may exist in your province or territory, right? So that you can there's no judgment. So it's completely accepting of whatever option you make. It doesn't require you to take a certain step. It informs you about what steps that you can take. So it puts everything in your hands. And then after you've done an assessment of all the options, then you can decide which route, if any, you want to take. So it really is an opportunity to empower you. Yeah.
What an amazing resource. I mean, that's so fantastic that that's available. And that you could, like you said, even like I'm in Nunavut, or if I'm in Ottawa, or I'm, you know what I mean? Like that you can find the resources that are available to you there. So that's really.
Absolutely. And it was launched this year on March 8th. It's been a 5-year journey. So because it's been a huge piece of work that will also continue to need to be updated and so forth. And so we're very proud to have been supportive of After Me Too to launch this really important resource and really develop from scratch, literally develop from scratch. And so that's why it took so long. But it's also an honor to be able to have this kind of a resource available in Canada for anyone who needs advice on what to do if they're experiencing any kinds of unwanted abuse, harassment, whatever it is that may happen.
That's fantastic. Like, what a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
I guess in developing that resource and just the work that you've been doing for so long, have you noticed, or like, are you seeing that there is more additional progress or momentum happening around sexual harassment in the workplace? Like, can we say that things are getting better? Like, what is sort of, give us a snapshot of what you see is going on currently and where you think things are going.
I'm glad you asked that, because normally we only talk about the problem and we never necessarily talk about the progress that's being made. And so it's important that we're able to chart that, measure it, assess it, and report it, and be transparent about it, right? So I'm happy to say that with resources such as what we just talked about, the After Me Too resource, as well as more conversations like this, that I'm seeing and hearing of more openness in terms of these kinds of conversations by employers to have among their employees, but also, the just having, whether or not cases are successful through the legal system, what it does is that it initiates dialogue, right? So whether or not someone is, feel as if they've gone through the process, because, legal remedies don't always give you the sort of the closure, the healing, the how do I put it now? The response that you think you'll get, because I think our courts are still have a long way to go in terms of learning. But what I am happy about is to know that that judges are in fact being trained in terms of these issues. They're getting the training that they need. They are being required to do that, as opposed to choosing to do that. There have been some horrendous kinds of outcomes in court cases that kind of makes you shake your head. But, judges are just like us. They're people who have been in the same kind of society that we are, despite their expertise in the law. But understanding what the impact is not something that they have experienced. And so seizing the opportunity to do that kind of education for them is important. So that's one thing. There are more resources available for all of us to understand our biases, for example, right? What are the blind spots or hidden biases that we hold that we don't know about? So I think that's an important thing, that I'm seeing much more tools and resources available for that folks are taking. I've done these myself, despite being in this work. I think it's important because we're all humans. I think where I see the most progress is probably is generational, and it's among young people, right? Where it's young people that are responding, for example, most to the signal for help, right? Where they, oh, I know that, and I know what I'm gonna do. I know what to do. Like, it's incredible to just see the level of response that young people are having to saying that's not okay when they see something happening, you know? And then there's much more research that's being done as well around these issues that's becoming within the public domain, and is giving each of us the language, along with the understanding of how to discuss these issues, of how to do so thoughtfully. And then the other thing that I'm seeing, Kim, that I really like among young people is that they don't have the same kind of mindset that us older ones do. I'll talk about myself, where they're seeing a kind of these issues in pillars. They're seeing them as part of the same, right? They're seeing the intersection among these issues. They understand it fast, you know, and they get it much faster than those of us who weren't raised in these times do. So if with them being the leaders that will take over from folks like me and others, I think we stand in a much better place around seeing these issues take root, and or it's not just the issue, the understanding of these issues take root and have much better responses, and frankly less resistance to change. So that gives me great hope.
It's always nice, sometimes, remember, we used to hear about it with the millennial generation. Each generation was like, oh no, the next generation. But what we're hearing here is that, especially when it comes to these social issues and being more aware of their interconnectedness, and like you said, this term that is relatively new to people who aren't involved in EDI, the concept of intersectionality and how that plays a role in how people experience the world and violence in the workplace. It's great to know that we have a generation that's coming up that's much more aware. And I guess along with that, so we know that a big piece of that is the fact that they're much more aware, right? Like it's starting to be taught in schools. They're starting to hear about it more. If you could lead the people who are joining us today, and I would say that we could probably put them in like two groups. So we have the individual who has experienced this or has seen their peer experience this and wants to be able to support and make a change, or to help themselves. And then we have a number of employers who are joining us today who want to be that great workplace. They want to ensure that their employees feel safe, that they belong, because they know that that's the only way to keep the best and the brightest, right? What would you leave those two audiences? What would be something you'd want to leave them with today when it comes to addressing gender-based violence in the workplace?
That's a good question. I think I want to say that at this stage, post hopefully fully pandemic times, I think we've seen a lot and heard a lot. And I think the world collectively that we've taken a pause on so many things. We've seen the issue with George Floyd's death, and we were all sort of in our lockdown state when this happened. We've come to know, and we can't unknow. We can't unlearn or unsee all the things that we were slowed down enough to see and digest. And so what do we do with that now? How do we kind of, I don't like the term build back better, it's too political, but not go back to the norm. How do we create a new norm, right? And I think this is an opportunity that we have in front of us, and I think it would be a shame to waste it, right? So here at the foundation, we say we want to do our work around creating a new normal for society that is a world where gender-based violence is not okay, where discrimination, harassment, racism, sexism, any kind of discrimination is not okay. And it's not only that it's not okay, but what are we doing to make sure it's not okay? And I find that really inspiring, particularly because I've been doing this work for nearly 4 decades. And to still be inspired at this stage of my career, I think says a lot. But I'm also an advocate at heart. So advocates may be seen to criticize a lot, but what we don't necessarily know about advocates is that we are forever hopeful, or else we wouldn't be advocating, right? We are the most hopeful people on the planet. And that's why we advocate, because we can actually envision a better world. We can actually envision all of us actually living in a place where we can all feel accepted and a strong sense of belonging. And so I think that's the opportunity that we have as employers, as leaders, as people who care, as those of us who do EDI work, that those of us who care about justice and equality, that this is the time and this is the opportunity that we have to do that, because we've seen the ugly side of it, but we also know what's the beautiful side of it. The beautiful side of it is really what we're fighting for, where everyone can feel that they belong. And maybe a final thought that I can share is that one of our founders, the late but great Rosemary Brown, is one of our 8 visionary founders for the foundation, is the first Black woman who was elected as a provincial legislature in a part of the provincial legislature in BC. And she said in the formation of this organization that until all of us have made it, none of us have made it. And I love that quote, because it says to me that we need to think of this as we're all in it together. And those of us who have been privileged enough, whether it's because of education or where we were born or our economic status or our racial identity or our able-bodied identities and existence, those of us with those privileges can utilize the equity of those privileges to support others. That's what it says to me. And so I think that's the opportunity that we have to not go back to the way things were because we were okay, right?
Right.
I was personally okay, right? But to not go back to that, but to see that we can utilize the power of our privilege to support those who are less powerful and less privileged.
I love that. That's like the quote of the day, right? I want to see that plastered everywhere.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure I get it right. He's like, so we haven't made it until we all make it, right?
That's correct.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Paulette, for coming and sharing your knowledge with us today and talking about the fantastic work that your foundation is doing and the resources that you have spent many years, as you said, developing to ensure that that we can all help each other in making sure that we end gender-based violence, particularly in the workplace.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you so much to Engineers Canada for having me. It's a joy to have this conversation. It really is. And so thank you for stepping into this conversation and for having me to be a part of it.
Like I said, the pleasure is all ours. Really, really happy that you were able to come and share your knowledge. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Jeanette for some final thoughts.
Thank you, Paulette, for those valuable insights into workplace violence prevention and for sharing with us and with our audience insights and resources about how to go beyond the legal framework, be an anti-violence and anti-harassment workplace, and continue to work toward a better world where everyone can feel that they belong. And thank you, Kim, for leading our session today. Like me, I'm sure that our audience has greatly appreciated and will greatly benefit from this session. I would like to let our audience know that if you would like to reflect back on the learnings and teachings of today or any of our other virtual sessions, recordings will be made available on Engineers Canada's YouTube channel in the coming weeks. We will also keep the Discord channel open for the next hour to ensure anyone who wants to directly engage in the conversation with their peers can do so. If you haven't already registered for our in-person 30 by 30 Employer Leadership Summit that is taking place next week, May 24th in Halifax, Nova Scotia, we'll include the registration link in the chat. To everyone, I will leave with you the quote shared by Paulette from the great Rosemary Brown: "Until all of us have made it, none of us have made it." Have a great rest of the day.